Everybody. Welcome you to our session number 11 of our 6 weeks of fitness program. And I'm so happy to see you here this evening. And I hope you received the printout I sent out on Sunday with the nutrition handout, actually, and I had a chance to review it. If not, well, we got you here anyway. And we have Tricia here to take you through the nutrition segment. Trish, take it away.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Happy Tuesday again, another Tuesday. So yes, next week, I'm going to say ahead of time, next week we're having that wonderful bonus week that we got. So, and what I would like to put out there now is during this week, I really encourage you all to email either to myself or to Vince anything that you may want to cover in that last bonus week, whether it be going back and refreshing a little bit, or something that we just didn't cover that you really, let's really take that last week to get some information that maybe we didn't cover that you wanted. Along with that, I'll say, yes, when I send the handouts on the Sunday, I do refer to them a lot when I'm speaking. So I hope you're just giving them a look. So if questions pop up, of course, I encourage everybody, go ahead and start typing them in the chat and I'll answer them as I go along. So what we've been talking about this whole 6 weeks is what we put on the plate, why we put it on the plate, what are we getting from all those foods, right? So we're going to wrap that up a little bit. We finished talking about carbohydrates last week, which was a big topic that we took 2 weeks to talk about. And again, if there's anything that's still in your mind that seems a little unclear, I want you to go ahead and start putting, yay, hi Liz. Hi, I'd like to know more about sugar, fructose, maltose, and glucose. Okay, so I'm going to start there. So fructose, maltose, and glucose, fructose and maltose and sugar, regular sugar, are all forms of sugar. Glucose is the most simplest form of the sugar. It's the one molecule of sugar. Fructose and maltose, lactose would be in that as well. Those are forms of sugar, but they're not just that one glucose molecule. They're glucose and something else. And together they make another type of sugar. So fructose, for example, is fruit sugar, but it's not just that one glucose by itself. It's combination, right? So they're all forms of sugar. It's just that the glucose is the simplest, most broken down form. That's the sugar, end of story. That's it. It gets broken down to glucose. The other forms are forms of sugar, but they're not just the one glucose molecule. There's something else in there. It's important to know those other words, because when you're looking at labels and you're looking at ingredients, it might not say sugar, right? It might not be cut and dry that there's sugar in there. It might use some of those other words. It might use fructose, it might use lactose, it might use maltose. So anything that's like that with that OSC, that's going to be some form of sugar. Okay, so things to look out for. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about what's on the label as I go through today, but that's where you are with the sugar. Those are all types of sugar. And like I said last week, once it goes into the body, sugar is sugar. Is brown sugar better than white sugar? No, they're both sugar. They do the same thing when they go in the body. They get broken down in the same way. We can't take more of one than we can of another. They're all sugar. Honey is still a sugar. Are you getting a little bit of some natural properties to honey that you may not be getting with a white sugar? Yes, you are, but it's still being broken down as sugar. Once it's inside the body and it starts to get broken down, the body really doesn't know if you reached for the brown sugar or the sugar in the raw or the white sugar. It doesn't know. So we treat it all the same. We treat it as sugar. How about coconut sugar? Coconut sugar, now that's a new one for me. I've seen coconut milk, coconut oil, coconut everything else. Coconut sugar, I'm going to assume, is a derivative of the fructose, right? And the sugar that's in coconuts because it's a fruit. So it's going to fall along the lines of a fruit sugar, a natural sugar, And again, we can use any of these sugars, the natural sugars that are coming from fruits that we're eating the fruits. Remember, that's a little bit better because we're eating it at the same time that we're eating the fruit. We're getting the benefit of the body breaking down the fiber in the fruit and actually digesting, eating the fruit. So we're not getting that quick spike, right? If you're talking about a coconut sugar that's kind of all broken down to use as a sweetener, the way that like an agave or something like that would be, then at the end of the day, it's already broken down. We're using it as a sweetener. It's still a sugar, right? We get the benefit of it not affecting our blood levels of sugar when we're eating it as a natural sugar. Just wondering, what is the difference between soluble versus insoluble fiber? Is this something that we need to be concerned about when reading nutrition labels? You don't need to be concerned about it because they're both good, and we should have both. So the difference between soluble and insoluble fiber would be that a soluble fiber goes into the stomach and it starts to absorb water and it takes up space in the stomach. And that's that fiber that we eat to help us feel full. Because it's soluble, it's taking in that water, right? Think of like an oatmeal, right? Or beans. If we keep them sitting in water overnight, we come the next day and they've, right? So that soluble fiber is taking in the water, and when it's in our stomach, we're feeling full because that's what it did, and we want it, and it's fine, and we want it to do that. Insoluble fiber, it's not doing that. It's not sitting in our stomach taking in the water. It's actually, it's just going through our system, but it is going to grab some stuff on the way out, which is what we want it to do. It helps to bring down the cholesterol because as it's going through our system, it's kind of grabbing some of that with it and taking it out. And that's how that fiber helps to lower our cholesterol. So we want both. You shouldn't worry about either one. And it really won't break it down for you on the label, whether it's soluble or insoluble. It's just going to tell you if it's fiber, but any type of fiber, we should have both. So any type that you're eating is perfectly fine. The ones that are more of the, like I said, the grains or the beans, you're going to think of that as the soluble fiber. If you think of something that is going to absorb water, that's what you're thinking of there. And the insoluble is more of those that are just like the peels that we're getting our fiber from, the skins and things like that, that we're not really digesting, but they are going into the system. And we need both types of fiber to really start to be regular and go to the bathroom regularly and kind of form what we need to go to the bathroom. So it's a good question, but you should not be afraid of either kind of fiber, right? And that brings up a good tie into the handout that went out this week, was the one about choosing whole grains. And that was just a little, refresher of what I talked about when I talked about that type of carbohydrate, all the grains. And if you looked at that handout, it gave that little picture of the grain, of the whole grain. And it says around the outside, you have that bran and you have the germ, right? And we know those terms just from having what? From having bran muffin, bran cereal, germ. You might see wheat germ. You see it in a bottle. We could sprinkle it on yogurt. We could sprinkle it on something. Those are parts of the whole grain, right? Full of fiber, full of nutrients. You peel those away and you go inside and get the little white seed that's inside. And that's where you're getting just that white flour from, or white product, or white rice. That's helpful to know, and good to know that both are good for you. Yes, you're welcome. So that was looking at that whole grain. Now, if you looked on that list, the list of whole grains, the list of refined grains. So refined grains are the ones that they stripped away part of that whole grain and are just using really the inside of it. They already kind of stripped away a lot of it. Yes, they added back the vitamins, but again, it's not in its whole state. It's not in the way it was intended to be. Now, on both of those whole and refined are some of the same things, right? You see oatmeal on both. You see corn on both. Why? Because we could get it either way. We could get whole oats, which are the whole grain, the whole oat that they're using, or we could get more of a refined oat that they've done a little stuff to it. So if I'm getting that instant oatmeal, it's more refined. It's not really the whole oat, as opposed to if I'm getting an oat where the label says 100%. Does that mean never eat the instant oatmeal? No, it doesn't. Because you're still getting some benefit from it. And it's still a good grain and still something to include. But just know that just because it says oatmeal is on the whole grain list doesn't mean that every single oatmeal is a whole grain. You know, cornmeal is on the whole grain side, but a corn tortilla may not be the whole corn, right? So we have to understand that when they're making some of these products, they're not using the whole plant. They're not using the whole thing. Only when they are using the entire thing is this a whole grain. Okay, so I hope you got a chance to look at that. It also gives a little look about how much we should actually have. So they use it in this handout as ounces. I had grains on the other handout in terms of how many carbohydrates we're getting. So on this handout, it says we should have about 5 to 6 ounces of grains. So that would be similar to carbohydrates in that an ounce, what they consider an ounce for a grain, would be about a serving, a 15-gram carbohydrate serving. Used instant oatmeal to bake the cookies. Okay, great. I'm curious, Christina, did you use that instead of flour or in addition to flour? That sounds interesting. So out of that 5 or 6 ounces in addition to flour, okay, nice. So out of that 5 or 6 ounces that of grains that we should have, at least 3 of that should be whole. So that means that we don't have to pick whole grain for every single thing that we eat, right? If you really can't tolerate brown rice, you just don't like it. Okay, so but you like whole wheat bread. So you'll have whole wheat bread, you won't have brown rice, right? That means we don't have to have it as an absolute. But we want to, at least half of the things that we're choosing that are grains should be in that whole grain form. Okay. So something else that was on, a few other things that were on that whole grain handout, right, is to be careful about just going by the color, right? Just because the bread is brown doesn't mean it's whole, right? We have to read that label, because they'll take a white flour and they'll add, often it's molasses that they're adding to it to give it that brown color. So now what have they added to our processed flour? They've added a little sugar and they've made brown bread. And if we're not careful, we are looking, oh, there's brown bread. That must be whole wheat. So we have to be careful, right? Just because it's the brown color doesn't mean it's whole wheat. Just because it says wheat doesn't mean it's whole wheat. It has to say whole before the word wheat. It has to say whole wheat, whole grain, not just wheat, not only 7 grain, 12 grain. These are all, they're good. They're good choices. They're much better than just getting a regular white bread. But if we really are looking for that whole wheat, whole grain, it has to say whole wheat, whole grain. That word whole has to be in front of it. 100% wheat, cracked wheat, 12 grain, 9 grain. These aren't necessarily whole grains, right? So that's really, really important. So that takes me to the nutrition label. And I did start to talk about this last week, just about the carbohydrates. But now I want to talk about some other parts of the nutrition label that are very, very important. What I think is the most important part of the nutrition label is right up on top. So when you're looking up on top there, the very first thing that's up there is the serving size. Now, all the numbers on the nutrition label are based on whatever serving size they have put there on top. And then it's going to tell you how many of those servings are in this container that you have. Now, there are many products that we may have the whole thing, but that label may be telling you that this can that you have is 2 or 3 servings. So if I'm looking at the numbers on the nutrition label, assuming that it's the whole can, let's say, but they're telling me that there's 2 servings in the can, well, then that means that all those numbers, if I have the whole can, have to be times 2. So this is the most important thing that we look at first and foremost, is how many servings are in this can or box or bag that I'm about to have. And these numbers are for what portion serving. Because if we're eating much more than these numbers are giving us, and we just think that, well, it has, 200 calories, but the 200 calories is for half a cup and I had a cup, then I didn't have 200 calories, I had 400 calories. Right. So this to me is the most important part of the label, because we have to understand that first and foremost. We have to know how much we're having. And the companies are not going to put a number that we would be thinking, because they want us to look at it quickly and say, oh, good, there's 200 calories, there's 20 grams of carbs, that's pretty good, and not pay attention to the other stuff. So that when we have the whole package, we think that we made a good choice. And maybe we made an okay choice if we kept to the portion. Right. So this is really important, because there are a lot of snack foods are really good for that. Right. Those really small bags of chips that if you get them, you eat the whole bag. Right. Nobody doesn't eat the whole bag. Some of those bags say that they're supposed to be 3 servings, 5 servings in the bag. So now when I'm looking at my nutrition facts, but I ate the whole bag, I might have to times all those numbers by 3. I might have to times them by 5, right? So we have to understand what numbers they're giving us on that label. So that's first and foremost. Look at your servings, how many are supposed to be in that container, and then how much of it you're having, so that you know how true those numbers are to what you're eating. Okay. And look, maybe you can do it. It doesn't mean that just because something is 2 servings and you're going to eat the whole thing, that you can't. But you have to have a true picture of what you're eating, and a true idea of what you're taking in. Okay, so after that is the calories. And again, like I said last week, all these numbers also are a guideline based on 2,000 calorie diet. And many of us should not take in a 2,000 calorie diet. Okay. Please talk about the effects of boiling foods together. For example, if you prepare soup and you put a potato and a slice of pumpkin, which may turn to puree while boiling, are you getting the same amount of carbs in the potato and the same nutrients from the pumpkin when you consume that broth? Okay. So anything that we are boiling, we are going to start to get a little bit less of the nutrients. Now, if you're having the whole thing, you're making it as a soup, you're still eating whatever remains in there, and you're still drinking the broth, you're getting nutrients. It's not that you're not getting any nutrients, but we start with whatever fruit or vegetable is as a whole. The more that we do to it, everything starts to come down a little bit. So we're not going to get it at optimal. Not because it's not still in there. You didn't take it out, right? You put it in the pot, you boiled it, and then you ate it. But just that process, just that heat starts to break things down. So we're not going to get the exact same amount of nutrients as if I just slice something and ate it. We wouldn't, right? We wouldn't eat a potato raw, but something that we would eat raw, I'm going to get optimal nutrients. This is the full amount of what I'm going to get. If I'm going to slice a pepper and I'm just going to slice it and eat it, I'm going to get 100%. If I'm going to put it in a stir fry, I'm going to get a little bit less. If I'm going to boil it, I'm going to get a little bit less. So for each thing that I'm doing to it, I am going to get just a little bit less. Still of benefit. It's not that you're getting no nutrients, but it's not going to be that optimal amount as if I ate it doing very minimal processing to it. Now, as far as the carbohydrates go, same thing. They start to break down, right? Everything starts to break down if we're heating it. But once I have it, so if it's a potato soup and I have the potato that's become mostly puree plus the broth, I'm still getting a good portion of those carbohydrates. They're not kind of going away. They're breaking down. So it may not be, again, we're going to talk about the blood sugar, right? It may not affect the blood sugar in the same way. Actually, now it's more liquefied. So it may affect the blood sugar in a quicker way. It may spike it a little quicker than eating it because it doesn't have to break it down. Okay, so you'll get the nutrients, you'll get the carbohydrates. You won't get the nutrients to their max effect, right? Their max benefit. But again, that doesn't mean don't have them. That doesn't mean don't make soups with those things, right? We should still include them. But that's where we get all this variety, right? That's where, okay, I'm having some soup, but I also earlier today had a big salad, right? That's where that variety comes from. And that's why we have that variety, because I want to have some things that maybe I'm not getting it at its maximum benefit. Maybe it's not the best choice. That's okay, because the rest of my day, I did make the better choices. And that's the way we do this. That's the way all of this works. We don't try to, I can't eat any of these things. I have to make the best choice every single time. It doesn't always happen that way, and that's okay. But if we're eating in this better way, the majority of the time, we don't have to make ourselves crazy with, okay, I can't overcook this. I won't get max nutrients. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine to include it. But just know that the more you do two things, you're going to start to go down in levels, right? You're going to lose a little bit each time. Okay. So we get back to the nutrition label. It runs through your fats. And again, just like breaking down the carbohydrates, it breaks down those, really only the two, the saturated fats and the trans fats, because those are the ones that we really want to be careful about. Something may have a lot of fat. We said healthy fats, nuts, nut butters, avocado, healthy fats, no problem. But that saturated fat and that trans fat, we really want to limit those. Those are the ones that give us a problem with cholesterol, give us a problem with our heart. So it does break those down, and it breaks down the carbohydrates, which we mentioned. And then at the bottom, it'll give you some of the vitamins and minerals, not all of them, and the percentage of whatever's in that food. And again, it's all going back to that 2,000 calorie. So you use it as a guideline. Between 5 and 20% is what you're looking for. Something that's at 5% is a little bit lower. So if it's the fat and it's at 5%, it's a lower fat food. The numbers might not be exact, right? Because you might not be on a 2,000 calorie diet, but you know that if it's 5, it's pretty good. If it's closer to 20, it's a little higher of that type of food. So if the carbohydrates are at 22% on this particular label, that food is a little higher in carbohydrates, whether we're on a 1,500 calorie diet or a 2,000 calorie diet. Then we get to the ingredients. Now, ingredients are listed in the order of what's in that product. So the very first thing that is listed on the ingredient means that that product is mostly that. Okay, so that's where that whole comes in again. If it says whole wheat, if it says whole oats, if it says whole cornmeal, that's a whole grain. If the very first thing on there is a sugar, then this product is mostly sugar. If the next 6 ingredients you can't pronounce, this is not a healthier food to pick, right? Because if it's all kinds of stuff that you can't pronounce, then it's either some type of preservative, right? For some reason, they're trying to keep it fresh. They're trying to give it flavor. They're trying to give it color. It's not a whole natural food. You may find some of those, now if there's 35 ingredients, right? maybe this isn't the best choice. So you're going to look at the ingredients label. The very first thing that's in there is the ingredient that is in that the most, and then it goes in the order of how much is in that product, and that's how the ingredients label is written. Okay, so that word whole is really, really important when we're trying to choose the best choice in grain and choose a whole grain. It really must say whole. Okay, the very last thing I will say about nutrition label is that best by, sell by, best if used by, and kind of what that means. Sell by simply means that the stores have to have it off the shelf. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad for you, that something's going to happen to you, you're going to get sick if you eat it, but the stores cannot sell it after this date. Best by or best if used by means that by that date, if you have it before that date, that product is going to be at its best. It's going to taste the freshest. If you have it after that date, it may not taste the way it was intended to, but it does not mean that it's going to be harmful to you and it's going to make you sick in some way. Now, things that have to be kept at certain temperatures, obviously, if it's a cold storage food, then it's not going to be best by this date if you didn't keep it at that temperature. So things that have to stay temperature controlled must stay at that temperature through the whole time. But something that's a canned product or something that's kind of a shelf-stable product, you're okay to eat most of those foods after that date, best by. You're not going to see them in the stores because they're not allowed to have them on the shelf, but you're not in danger of becoming sick from them, right? There's even some foods that are temperature controlled, like a yogurt is good for that. You can eat yogurt past that date that says best by, and you're not going to become sick from it, right? It may not taste at its best. That's what it's telling you. Now, if it says EXP, if it says expired, then that's different. That's an expiration date. That means that after this date, you cannot have it. And you actually don't see expired EXP often on foods. You actually see that more often on vitamins. You'll see it on medication. You'll see it on toothpaste. You'll see it on things that lose their effectiveness, right? You see it on Tylenol and Advil. Why? Because they lose their effectiveness, so they actually expire, where they may not do the same thing anymore. But for foods, you don't often see an expired. You see that best by or sell by, right? If it's meats that you buy in cold storage, then it will say best by, use by, or freeze by, right? So that means if you take it home and you put it right in the freezer and it stays frozen solid, you can keep it frozen solid for a couple months. And then when you defrost it, it's still okay. So as long as you keep things within their temperature control, you don't have to, oh, this says best by and that was last month, I better throw it out. No, you're okay. You can eat it. Okay. And obviously, of course, we use our sense. If something really doesn't smell right, then that's not something we eat. It's just not going to taste good. Okay. All right. So it's already 7:29. I do want to just reiterate what I really would love for everybody to do next week, since it is kind of a bonus week, is really get into either myself or Vince in this week, anything that maybe we missed or didn't cover, or we need some clarification. I will be more than happy to spend the next week kind of going over that. Otherwise, of course, I have more topics I can talk about, but certainly I would love to spend that last week making sure that everybody got the information that they want. How much fat is in condiments? Well, it depends on what condiments we're talking about, right? Certainly mayonnaise, creamy salad dressings, those are going to be our ones that have much more fat. Something like a ketchup, not a lot of fat, but it does have salt and it does have sugar. So that's something to be mindful of. Mustard is kind of your better condiment. It doesn't really have too much of the salt, sugar, or fat. So that's going to depend on what condiment it is. Flavoring, certainly, like just using a hot sauce or some pepper, those are your better ways to go. But if it's creamy in any way, like a mayonnaise, a chipotle mayo, a ranch, any of those things are going to be high in fat just because they're a creamier product. But the ketchup and anything that's more tomato based, barbecue sauce, those are going to be very high in salt. So those are things to be mindful of. And you know, we don't have to overdo it with the condiments. We put a little bit. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. All right, and there I am on 7:31.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tricia. This is another awesome nutrition workshop. I learned a lot just from listening to you, and
Thank you. Good.
you can see the questions that came kind of hot and heavy. So
Yeah.
I'm glad they asked you these questions, not me. You
Oh.
know? This is great. But thank you again.